So now our next presenter is Mary Jo Ybarra. She is the Moses Outreach Behavioral Health Coordinator, Moses Lake Community Center, and she also works in Quincy, my understanding. I know she's done a lot of incredible work, and she's based out of Quincy, so she works with their agency, Community Health Center there. She will be talking today on workforce and climate justice, the health effects of wildfire smoke in Eastern Washington. Welcome, Mary Jo.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm not sure if Anne received my slides on time, but if not, I will go ahead and pull them up if I can. I have our IT guru here to help me in case that happens. But I first wanted to say buenos días a todos. On this auspicious occasion, I want to also thank the Latino Civic Alliance for hosting this event, and also wanted to thank Nina in particular. You know, she's a jackrabbit here from Quincy, born here in Quincy, so really proud to see her up on this stage. So really proud of her and the accomplishments she has done all of these years. So I'm going to, I think since I don't see any slides, I think I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share these. Am I doing this correctly? Okay, can you guys see these slides?
Not yet, I can't.
Yep. Okay, Latrell, do you want to help?
We'll figure this out.
Sure.
Okay, I think we're seeing it. Okay, excellent. We're seeing it now, Mary Jo.
There you go. All right. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and back up here a little bit. I wanted to talk a little bit today about workforce, and the particular workforce I wanted to discuss today was farm workers and climate justice. And yesterday I wanted to talk to you guys about a conversation I had with my mom this last weekend. I called her up because it was her birthday, and we began talking about, you know, she's been in Washington State working in agriculture since the 1950s. And we talked about some of the challenges that continue to happen, even, you know, here we are almost 60 years later, seeing some of these issues. So, you know, it was really important for her. You know, she said, I really want to tell you guys how important the work is that you guys are doing when you guys are supporting this workforce. She said it's because of them that we have individuals that are probably on this call today. So I wanted to remind that, including my brother, Alex. So I wanted to first start off today and address a little bit, maybe a little history first about our coalition work. Our coalition work, we call it the Farm Worker Call, and it began just as COVID hit Eastern Washington. And the Farm Worker Call, or this coalition, began and was founded by Promotoras de Salud, outreach programs, and community health centers, community health workers here in Washington State. We basically identified that we needed to support one another during COVID, and we felt it was important to share information with each other and across the state. One of the things that I knew that was going to happen was that we were going to become inundated with outreach work. So at that point, I asked Farm Worker Justice and Northwest Regional Primary Care Association to come in and coordinate those calls. And until to this day, we continue to have a great relationship with them, and they continue to hold those calls one time monthly. The call began first with Washington State individuals, and then quickly expanded to our Oregon brothers and sisters, and then also to the state of California. And now we have regular folks coming in from Idaho. Occasionally we have other partners coming in from Wisconsin, Texas, the East Coast, Arizona, New Mexico. So it's been a really great coalition working still to this day regarding COVID issues. The goal of the coalition and the calls that we make are basically to protect farm workers during COVID, And again, we're still in the pandemic, like Nina was talking about. And one of the things that we do really well is share strategies with each other across all of the Western states. And we also share information by region. So we hold phone calls where people are sharing information with one another. And we also share maybe hot topics that are coming up and best practices. One of the things that happened during the phone calls was that immediately the people who had boots on the ground began to raise some of the needs that we weren't addressing. And those were regarding wildfire smoke issues and heat issues. And you can just imagine if I had COVID and I'm a farm worker and I'm working in the middle of extreme wildfire smoke and there's smoke particulates in the air, it's extremely hot and I have to wear a mask. You can just imagine the kind of issues that many of the workers were facing and that we were hearing about. So in 2021, one of the things that I asked from the coalition is that if we could begin to look at, along with COVID, to begin to look at maybe creating a plan to work on wildfire and smoke, because at that point we had deaths in the farm worker community that just, we could not ignore it anymore. So what we decided to do was model the plan very much like how the governors from the West Coast gathered together. They said, we're going to work on COVID together as states. And what we said is we want the same kind of model to be used to address wildfire smoke and heat. So that was kind of our goal at that point. And we had fantastic members from PECUN in Oregon, Farm Worker Justice, people from Northwest Justice Project, and our clinic in Moses Lake and Quincy Community Health Center. And there was other groups as well who began to advocate to develop a strategy to implement what we call the Western Smoke and Heat Protection Pact. So this is kind of this was the slide that we primarily used when we were educating people about what the Western Pact was. And so we shared this with many people across the country. And again, the goals for the Western Pact was basically to create build strong, consistent standards across Western states to protect farm workers from hazards of heat and wildfire smoke. At that time, what we decided to do was three things. One, write letters to each of the governors in the state of California, Oregon, and Washington. We also met with some state officials, as well as our state here in Washington, and we also had some media coverage regarding the work that we were doing. Why did we want to adopt the standards for heat and wildfire smoke across all states? The first reason was because climate change always has disproportionately impacted farm workers. We know that we're the ones that work outside. We're the ones that are working even in the midst of wildfires. We're the ones who continue to work when there's heat waves. And importantly, one of the things that we have very rarely talked about was that we are the ones who continue to work in extreme cold weather. I recall talking to one of our providers a couple of years ago, and he said, Mary Jo, you guys really need to start doing some work on extreme cold, because what we're finding is a lot of workers are getting frostbitten on their either their fingers or their toes. And so this is a topic we very rarely hear about, but I wanted to present as part of the work that we're doing as far as the pact is concerned. Also, we know that agriculture is primarily done, as I said, during outside and during peak seasons when it's the most hot and when we typically see most of the smoke across all of the Western states. We also wanted to talk about how farm workers are really, unfortunately, while they've been named and deemed essential workers, they continue to be undervalued, and they deserve better treatment with their health, as Dr. Morales talked about, some of the barriers that we face, and also some of the safety protections in the workplace. And while there are safety protection standards in place, one of the things we know is that there's, and I'll talk about this later, is that some of those rules and education aren't happening at the same level across all of our states. The other issue that we want to discuss was health risks that are increased by when we have both heat and smoke exposure, and also when we have COVID. So what we find is that agricultural workers, because they're working harder, they're inhaling faster, they're working faster, and so it just compounds how quickly they become exhausted because of heat and smoke, but also because of the physical nature of their work. We also know that, you get hot, and if it's hot outside, it just compounds that. So we begin to see issues around heat rashes, heat stroke, and unfortunately death. And honestly, you guys, we shouldn't be seeing people die of death. There's no reason for that. We also see that there's extreme heat stress and dehydration. And unfortunately, what we're starting to see now is that we're seeing kidney failures, and there's some studies that we'll reference at the end about that information. I think it's just really important for us to be aware of how impacts our population, our Latino population in particular. Let's see, the other things that we wanted to talk about was that, wildfire smoke has high particulate matter, and, of course, those are associated with huge health problems, and things we don't even think about, such as heart issues. It causes aggravated asthma. I mean, we know that. It just compounds it more. And we also have decreased lung function. So again, if you have COVID or any other respiratory issues on top of this, it just creates chaos with our health. And of course, we've seen it again and again, increased respiratory symptoms across the board, especially in particular with our farm workers. The other thing is that one of the things we really wanted to do was we wanted the rules to be the same across all of the states. Why? Because if workers start in California or in Washington and they move across states and the rules are different, they don't know what the standards are. And so that makes it difficult for our migrant farm workers in particular to know what are the protections, what are the rules from state to state, and it's hard for them to keep up with that, especially if the information is not being shared with them when they move from state to state. We also know that there's also different protections across different states. So one of our hopes was that the standards would be met and they would be the same across all of the Western states, and that we would be hopefully a catalyst so that we could change permanent rules to happen across the country. So we wanted the West Coast to lead that direction, and we wanted to be the leaders in that arena. And then finally, we wanted to also discuss that employers and workers currently lack adequate education and training about rules, risks, and protections. And it's not it's not a blaming game, but we find that, different organizations do different kinds of things. And while there's a standard, I think different organizations maybe lack, and some organizations, they raise to the occasion. We have wonderful growers that we work with that are doing excellent work at protecting their workers, but that's not in all places. And what we want is there to be a standard, and we want people to be trained the same, and in the language, and making sure that we address health literacy when we do those trainings. So currently the status of the regulations right now are that we, in Washington State and Oregon, they've implemented permanent heat rules in 2021 in Washington, and in Oregon in 2022. And California already had a heat stress rule. California and Oregon implemented permanent wildfire rules in February of 21, and in Oregon in July of 2022. Washington is in that process, and I know that at the safety conference that's happening tomorrow in Wenatchee, they'll be discussing some of those rules that are being proposed. The one thing I wanted to say that is really important is that our work had some impact, because this last summer in Yakima, we were told by the two authors from Labor and Industry that the Western PAC information that we put together was actually used as a model for those two authors to begin to write permanent rules here in the state of Washington. That was the first time we had heard that feedback. And they did, in fact, tell us that they reached out to the state of Oregon and to the state of California as they were making those permanent rules and writing them up. So that was a good win on behalf of the coalition and the work that we're doing. One of the asks that I have is that when we discuss climate justice and change impacts the health of economic securities of diverse communities, especially those already living in poverty. These communities need to be at the center of the green economy and mitigation of the impacts of climate change. So what I'm saying here is basically, when we think about climate justice, we need to make it personal. We need to see how it impacts us. And we need to have the voice of farm workers and those who work outside as part of the plans when we're talking about climate justice. I think it's essential to have their voices heard in the future talks that we have. And I know that the governor is going to be jumping on here in a few minutes, and I'm really asking him to be thoughtful. I know he's going across the globe talking about this, but I want him to come back home and remember that the people who feed us every single day are the ones who are most impacted by the work that we do. And I wanted to end today by sharing some of the research that we used to do the work that we did and that we continue to work on. We have some local folks from the University of Washington who did some of the work regarding smoke particulate matters and heat. And so I wanted to share this with you. And I also wanted to acknowledge Farm Worker Justice, and here's some of their contact information, and also Northwest Regional Primary Care Association. And I will hand it back over to you, Nina.
Well, first of all, Mary Jo, thank you so much. Extremely informative, especially in respect to farm workers. And you're right, farm workers, we have been fighting for years that farm workers be at the table, especially for climate justice. Your point, well taken. They need to be, especially for those that work outside. How can we be pushing policies if farm workers, those that work outside, are not at the table? It's not fair, it's not right. So we need to, on our end, definitely a reminder to keep advocating for that. I want to thank you very much for joining us. I did want you to say, if you could give us I've been asking panelists, do you have the main number for Quincy if anyone wants to get services with your community health center there at Quincy? Do you have that number at hand to say it?
I do. So in Quincy, our phone number here is 509-787-6423. And that one phone number will get you access to everybody in our clinic. And we do speak Spanish, and we speak English, and several of our staff speak Mixteco Bajo and Alto.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mary Jo. Thank you so much for all the incredible work. And I really enjoy working with you. It's an honor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mina.